Good morning and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be comparing the 35mm with the 50mm for car photography. Let's go! As I said in the intro, we're going to be talking about the 35mm and the 50mm. For a quick intro into these lenses, they're both the Canon RF mount. They're both the budget versions, so this is a 1.8 35mm, this is a 1.8 50mm. You can see somehow the 50mm is smaller, but there we go. There's a few more options. This is the macro version as well, which is probably why it's slightly larger. But yeah, we're not going to do a quality test. We're going to just go through the practical reasons of why you would have different ones, different use cases. And basically, you're going to let me know in the comments below whether you think a 35mm is better than a 50mm, or whether a 50mm is better than a 35mm. So let's get into it. So as I've said already, these are both the budget versions. You can get the macro 35mm for around £330. This one's my works one, so I didn't buy it myself, but £330 is not too bad at all. And then the 50mm, which I bought ages ago, and I use it all the time to be fair, I paid £160, but I'm pretty sure you can get it new for like 180, something like that, maybe. I paid 160 on eBay ages ago. But yeah, both great lenses, but I tend to swing for the 50mm because for my day-to-day job in the military, I deal with a lot of people and the subject is smaller, and I prefer the look that I get from the 50mm rather than the 35. I feel like the 35 is a little bit too wide and you don't get as much bokeh, but with car photography that's slightly different, and we're going to go through it with the car that's next to me, my great Citroen that you all know and love. So just covering the basics, I've got the 35mm on at the moment and the 50mm. Now, going straight back to like starter times, beginner times, if you're new to photography, a 50mm is the focal length, which the higher the number, the tighter the field of view, which we'll go on to in a second. So if you have a 200mm, you're going to be shooting something quite far away, like trackside car photography, for example, or if you were shooting this at the moment I'm filming on is a 13mm to 35mm, so the focal range is different. And a 15mm is wide, as you can see. I'm right next to you, I'm probably a metre away from you. The camera's here, look, right there, and now I'm massive. So focal length can drastically change the story of your video, for example, and the story that you're trying to tell with your photography. So 50mm is not classed, it's kind of believed or to be treated as the closest for our perspective of human perspective. I think that's why I like it so much, because I do like to do a lot of, especially like I say at work with humans, a lot of documentary style, photojournalistic style photography and videography, where it feels like you're immersed in it. And then, like I was saying, I don't really use the 35mm because my alternative wide angle lens I have at home is a 24mm Sigma, the Sigma Art 1.4, which I use if I want to get really close. That's the lens I'll use. Points to note though, before I move on for the practical stuff, is yes, you can buy budget lenses like these. I'll bring it up close so you can see how small it is in my hand, but points to note is you'll have flaws with budget lenses, which is why you have really expensive lenses at the higher end. So for example, this was 160 quid in the UK, in England, and then I was issued not that long ago the 50mm 1.2, which when it first came out was like £3 grand. I think you can get it for like 2,400 now, but do you know what I mean? There's a massive difference in the quality and the price. And I will be doing a video at some point soon to compare the 50mm budget to the 50mm 1.2. So like, subscribe and follow for more if you want to see that video that will be coming up soon. But points to note, like I was saying, 50mm is like perceived to be normal with zero distortion or very limited distortion, the correct compression. So like realistic distance and tightness of the subject within your frame. And then the further you go to like 10mm, so we're going to say 50mm here. Let's say you got 35mm, 24mm, 10mm. The further you go that way, you'll get distortion in like a curved image, like you'll see a GoPro, for example, that's ultra wide, and it's really, really distorted. I mean, you can fix that in post, but also your subject will be miles away. And also, the wider you go, just because of physics, the wider you go, the more likely almost everything's going to be in focus. And the further you go this way, so you've got the 50mm here, so you're going to have a nice chart. Might put a chart on the screen, we'll see what happens, but you get the picture. 50mm here, this is the centre, and then you can have like 70mm, 105mm, 200mm, all the way up to like 600mm. Some you can get larger ones than 600mm, but not very many people use that because it's extortionate money. But 600mm, you're going to get an extremely tight field of view, so you're very, very limited of how much you can fit in your frame. Also, if you're going to be at like 600mm and I'm shooting the car that's next to me, you're going to have to be miles away. If you're shooting a subject, you're going to probably have to have some. That was a big bang. They got like rook scarer things behind me. So yeah, you're going to have comms, for example, like earpiece or walkie-talkie, because you're going to be fucking miles away. But you're pretty much always going to have, the further you go to like 600mm, 200mm, 300mm, you're always going to have bokeh, there's blurry background. So there's always trade-offs with everything, with lenses, cameras, everything else like that. But with lenses, that's why people have like a 24, a 35, a 50, a 70, blah blah blah, so on and so forth. And you can also get a zoom lens, which I'm not going to talk about too much today, but you can have a 24-70, or you can have a 28-70 f2, and basically that's going to cover all of the lengths, but we're not going to get too much into that. That can go down the zoom versus prime video, but we're just going to talk about proportions and stuff like that without going too much into the weeds. So we're just going to show you practically the difference in proportion between the 35mm and the 50mm. So at the moment we've got the 35mm. I'm on a tripod. I am just going to switch the lenses. I'm not going to change any difference between the distance between myself and the subject, the car, my glorious Citroen. But yeah, we're going to just take a photo now. We're not going to go too much into the settings today because that's irrelevant. It's just mainly the focal length, because both lenses are 1.8. It's just a different field of view. So we've got 500th of a second f1.8 at 100 ISO. It's pretty crappy day today, overcast, and yeah, crap subject, crap location, but we're going through the practicalness of these lenses. So without further ado, I'm just going to take the photo of the Citroen. And as you can see here, let's zoom in a little bit. Let's see if I can zoom in. You should be able to zoom in. You've got a little bit of bokeh behind if we're zooming in on the side. It's nice and sharp though, I'll give it that. No polarizing filter on today, just due to practicality of this video and the different adapter filter threads that I've got on now. I'm not 100% whether I've got the right step-up rings for this, because this is usually my studio lens. I don't really use it very much. This is usually filming my YouTube stuff back at home. Anyway, let's go back and look at this. Like I said, pretty sharp, 1.8, so the front is pretty sharp. I just wanted to emphasize the bokeh, which is why I've gone to 1.8. But yeah, that's the 35mm. So without further ado, let's switch it up onto the 50. Switch it out. Going back to filter threads, what I mentioned, the 50mm is tiny, 43mm lens cap, and this one's a 52. Both tiny. That's neither here nor there. So it's going to take a photo. and taking a photo. Let's do a comparison between the 35mm. So you can see the focal length, getting a lot less of the foreground and the story, if you want to call it that, with the sorry, a lot more of the foreground and the story with the 35mm, which is why it's usually good photojournalistic street photography lens. And from what I heard, great for cars. They've both got good bokeh, to be fair. You're going to get more bokeh, I would say. Let's zoom right in on the computer, but I'm obviously going to zoom in now in practice on the camera. They both look pretty good, to be fair. They both accentuate how minging my car is. But like, as you can see, for practical purposes for this demonstration is how far I am away from the subject. Instead of changing the focal length, you might move forward, but the closer you get to the subject with a wider lens, getting a bit complicated, the closer you get with a wider lens, the more distortion you will introduce. So it's probably why it's, in practical terms, the 50mm, because it keeps you at a good distance away from the subject, is why you get good distortion. You get clean image with not much distortion and more of a realistic image. Anyway, a 35mm would be good to get nice and close if you wanted to get a bit wider, nice bokeh, but not too wide that everything's going to be too crazy distorted. You want to get a bit of foreground in there. And then a 50mm might be quite good if you want to introduce the driver of the car, or you want to get some, you can't get too close to the vehicle. Maybe you're at a show and it's behind, what do you call it, behind, not the wires, you know what I mean, it's barriered off, cordoned off, and you can't get too close, so 50mm can reach a bit more. And because it's a prime lens and it's 1.8, likelihood in a show indoors, you're going to get the advantages of the low light because it's 1.8 and you haven't got a zoom lens that's like f2.8 or f3.5. But let's move on to interior shots and see which lens favours that. So at the moment I've got the 50mm on and we're going to talk about interior shots. Now I'm using a bit of foreground here with the door, that's why it's completely out and not all the way in, doing some different bits and pieces. But obviously when you're doing photography, or not obvious, then you want to get as many different variations as you can. So let's just pretend that my Citroen has got a nice Momo or whatever Sparco detachable steering wheel, where you want to emphasize that with the Alcantara dash, the flocked dash, shall we say, and you want to accentuate this bit. The 50mm is going to be quite tight, so you might want to do just the isolated detailed shots of just the steering wheel, or just the gear stick, or just the flappy paddle shift, accentuating shots pretty good with a 50mm. So I'm just going to take a few photos, one on the tripod just to show you what this one's like, and then get some shots inside here just to get some detailed shots so I can show you how incredibly dirty and minging my car is. Extremely annoying. In the UK we are in winter, so everything's constantly minging all the time, and this is obviously a daily for me and not a nice show prepped Citroen. So yeah, we're just going to show you some detailed shots you can get with a 50mm. So the very first shot, like I've said, is this one. As you can see, accentuating the steering wheel. Nice bokeh, getting that emphasis on there. I'm just going to take it off the tripod. Let's say you want to get your gear knob. You want to show how cool your gear knob is to your mates. Let's say you've got some really nice indicator stalks. And let's say that you've got some nice titanium pedals that you want to show someone. You get the picture. This is obviously a bit in jest. I don't have the greatest of car, but let's say you wanted to accentuate, I don't know, the carbon fibre that's in the, what do you call it, in this, in the seats up here, the headrest of your bucket seats, or you've got some nice stitching, you've got badges, logos, got some nice wheel nuts, everything is nice and detailed with a 50mm. You could do it with the 35mm, as this one's the macro, but I just wanted to emphasize the fact that obviously you're going to get a lot tighter with the 50mm. But we're going to move on to the 35mm now and suggest some of the shots that you might want to get with the 35. So same again, I've got the 35mm on, exact same photo so that you can see the difference. I'll put those on screen now, and you can see obviously it's a lot wider, but I originally framed it up for the 50mm, so the composition is not great, but you can see how much wider the 35mm is compared, and I've used the exact same settings, so nothing's changed there. It's literally just the depth of field and how wide the camera is. So what I'll do now is take it off the tripod and I'll show you a couple of suggested shots you might want to get with the 35 because it's slightly wider. So let's say that you had some really nice seats because you're a bit wider, so you can get both seats. You'd never be able to get that in there with a 50mm. What you might want to do, because the door's in the way, is come over and shoot from the outside, depending on obviously what car you've got, and use the foreground to your advantage. Oh, a bit of a wasp. Or a horsefly. Definitely don't want horseflies. Comment below if you've ever been bitten by a horsefly. Horrendous. So going back to the steering wheel, the advantage that I've got with this lens here is it's the macro version, so I can't actually remember how close you can get with it with the specs, but I'll put up on screen. But with a macro lens, obviously you can get pretty damn close, but I'm not 100% sure how good of a macro it is. If I was going to use a macro lens, I'd probably use like 100mm, but macro photography is a completely different subject, which we're not going to talk about today. But let's finish off with getting the gear stick that's telling a bit more of the story. You might have the gear stick with a what do you call it, carbon fibre surround, or some stitching that's on the gaiter at the end, so you just want to emphasize using a bit more of a wider lens to tell more of the story of the vehicle that you're showing off. Let me know which ones you prefer out of those shots, and if you've got both a 50mm and a 35mm, comment below which ones you use more often. So that pretty much concludes the short intro into the 35mm and the 50mm. Comment below which ones you prefer. Just to recap then, both lenses are pretty similar in price compared to the higher end lenses. They're both 1.8, they're both small, they're both light. One is wider, the 35mm, one is narrower, the 50mm. One is more natural looking, which is the 50mm. One is slightly wider and could introduce distortion with the 35mm. I would say on show days, one is more practical, probably the 35mm, because sometimes you can't get too far away with the 50mm. But if you're on your own and doing a client shoot, I would probably sway to the 50mm, but it depends, because moving forward, you never know. I might keep the 35mm and then go for an 85mm to get the compressed shots. Or I've seen recently 105mm, which would be sick, but they're expensive, so we'll see. But yeah, pros and cons. There's not that many pros and cons between the both. They both have pros and cons, but when you get to the higher end of the lenses, like the 50mm 1.2 and this 50mm 1.8, there's loads of pros and cons between the both of those. And moving forward, I will be making a video between this and the 1.2 50mm, and then also for a bonus I'll be adding in my 50mm vintage lens just to show you the difference between those. Pros and cons are pretty similar when it comes to photography. Some of the pros and cons between the two for video, which we haven't really talked much about today, is pro is that a 35mm you're more likely to get things better in focus because it's slightly wider. And you're going to have a steadier shot if you're on a gimbal with a 35 or handheld, because it's wider and more forgiving. And if you're in a 50mm, you might have a bit because it's compressed, you might have more shaky footage, and you have to be much more conscious of if things are actually in focus than you do with a 35. That pretty much sums it up. Please let me know in the comments below if you've got either of these two lenses, which ones you prefer, and if you have a 35mm and you think you are looking to get a 50mm, or if you've got a 50mm and you think you're looking to get a 35mm, comment below and let me know if this has inspired you to do so. But yeah, as I said, thanks very much for watching. Like, subscribe, look forward to the next videos in the future, and I shall catch you in the next one.